Well, Broadway fans, we've been humming their tunes to The Wedding Singer for years, but now this team is back with another Tony-nominated musical, The Prom. I'm Sam Eckmann, and with me is the songwriting team behind the big musical comedy with a heart. It's Chad Beguelin and Matthew Sklar. Thanks so much for joining me, guys.
Sure.
You, as a songwriting team, have been working together for close to 20 years, I believe. I'm just curious, how did you first meet and how did you first start this partnership?
It's actually been about 26 years, believe it or not. Chad and I met, we were both at NYU. I was music directing a production of Godspell, and Chad was in the graduate program, and a guy who was the literary manager of an off-Broadway producing company called Musical Theater Works saw my production of Godspell and had read some of Chad's work, and basically came up to me after the performance and said, do you ever want to write musicals? And I said, yes, I'm dying to. I just have nobody to work with. And he said, I think I may have a person for you to meet. So Chad.
Yeah, it was funny. I had sent a script in to this guy, Andrew Barrett, and he wrote me a rejection letter. And I thought, oh man, maybe there's some way I can sort of still get to talk to him. So I sent him a letter back saying, this was way before emails or faxes or anything, no internet. So I took out my quill and I wrote him and I said, can I just take you to lunch and pick your brain? And by then he had met Matt, and he said, look, I think I know somebody who would be great for you to collaborate with. And so Matt and I met at a diner that's now a Starbucks in the East Village, and we just hit it off.
That's awesome. Well, for this show, what was the inception of The Prom like for the both of you? How did that first get started?
It was really
Nope, did we lose him?
We lost Chad.
Oh.
Mid-sentence too.
Mid-sentence, oh well. Let's see, he might be coming back here.
And
there he is.
Oh, there
we go.
He's back.
So he basically brought the idea to Casey, and Casey brought it to us, and we were thrilled.
Yeah, I think we may have lost a little bit of what you said, Chad. Jack Vertel had the idea for this potential musical, and he was working with Casey Nicola at Encores, and he had just seen the workshop of Elf that Chad, Bob, Tom Meehan, and I had written, and Casey had directed and choreographed. So he thought that we might be a great team for this musical. So yeah, then we just started meeting with Jack, and so we were just kind of chosen for it. It was really a great situation.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Elf, your two Broadway credits together are Elf and the Wedding Singer. Mm-hmm. But The Prom is really your first outing together that's not based on a pre-existing property.
Yeah.
How does that change the creative process for the both of you?
Well, when you're starting with a completely blank slate, it's definitely more of a challenge because there's no template, there's no sort of guide. You sort of have to write and rewrite and, go down a certain path and find that doesn't work. And so there was just a ton of rewriting on this. And it's also, one of those things where we would just get into a room and we would try and figure out what the story was going to be, who the characters were going to be. And then once we knew where we thought the song should happen, horn. Then Matt and I would go off and write the songs, but it was a lot of sitting in a room just spitballing ideas.
Yeah. And I'm curious, because it's such a blank slate, was there any sort of inspiration that helped you find kind of the musical identity of this piece?
Well, I think we went down the road of the Broadway characters first, because I think that's really in our wheelhouse. And I think it took a little longer to figure out what the kid's voice was going to be. And for me, a lot of that is simplifying. So the kids aren't going to sing to crazy chromatic and complex chords and melodies. So it was really, it was all from the heart, really, and just trying to simplifying the lyric and simplifying the music underneath, and just making sure it had a real heart and emotion to it, and pushing the story forward. And then with the adults, we gave them kind of each a flavor of Broadway. But we went down the road for a few years where Angie's character didn't exist, and it was actually going to be the understudy to Elphaba, who never got to go on, but she was always slightly green because she had her makeup never quite came off. And we went down that road and we wrote a few songs for that character, and we realized this is a little too campy. So then we kind of dialed back, and then Casey said, "What if the fourth person was like a chorus girl who'd seen everything, like Angie?" So we just said, let's just write it for Angie, and that's kind of how that all happened. But not having a template and not having source material made that possible for us. So we just got to kind of decide whatever we wanted to do. And sometimes you'd go down a road, realize, oh, that's not right, and you'd have to really rethink things.
I always wonder how much, like the actors, when they get involved, how that affects the writing, because obviously, Beth Level's singing a much different style than, Caitlin Kinnunen is.
Right.
So how much of that changes once the actors get involved in the process?
Well, for at least our 4 Broadway actors, we knew we were writing for them before we had our first table read. And I knew Beth and Chris Sieber for years. I knew Angie. Brooks was new to me, but I was certainly a huge fan of his. So I kind of listened to a lot of recordings with him on them. So I kind of knew where their vocal ranges were. But then when you get them in the room, it was beautiful mayhem. And we just had a great time, figuring out how everything worked with them and just really fine tuning everything for them. But we had a bit of a head start because we knew who we were writing for and we knew who we wanted to cast.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people wonder too with songwriting duos, how the process starts. So I wonder, what is your normal process? Does it begin with a lyric or a melody? How do you find your way in?
I mean, usually what we do is, after we've sort of decided what the assignment of the song is I will write a dummy lyric, just sort of, knowing that we're going to throw it away. And then Matt will sort of take that and get some inspiration. We'll talk back and forth, and then he'll come up with a tune and I'll retrofit the lyrics to that. But it has happened where Matt has just gone, here's the tune. And I'm like, oh my God, it's perfect. So I'll write to that. And also it's happened where I've given him a lyric and it stayed completely the same and he just wrote the music. But usually it's a little bit back and forth.
Yeah, I have lots of iPhone voice memos with me just going ba 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 ba, and Chad has written to those many a time.
And Chad, you also had you took time away and worked with Alan Menken on Aladdin. And I wonder, is there anything from that experience that you took away and brought back to this partnership?
Well, I really, not that I didn't trust him before, but I really learned to trust Casey Nicola, because we had a terrible time out of town with Aladdin. I mean, we got killed in Toronto. And so, he sort of really guided us and turned that ship around. And so now, when we were in Atlanta, whenever he would have an instinct, I would just be like, all right, let's give it a try. Because I also, the great thing about working with Matt is that I've known him so long that I already had that trust built in. But it was just sort of, listening to the people that you trust. And there are times when, I'll get a note about a lyric and I'll get very sort of tense, like, I don't know, can I do this? But with these guys, I feel like if they have an issue with the lyric, what they're really saying is they believe I can do better. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of a nice comfort zone there.
And going back to the prom, was there, I wonder what your favorite songwriting process was for which song turned out to be your favorite one?
I think
it can be different.
Yeah. I think the process with Dance With You is kind of amazing because the song just kind of appeared quickly. It was Chad was actually in Paris because Chad's husband was working for an airline and he was based in New York and Paris. So, I got an email one morning with this lyric for this idea for Emma's big song in Act 1. And I remember just opening up the email and just like welling up with tears, just saying, "Oh my God, this is a beautiful lyric. It's exactly what our show's about." So not one word has changed since that email, and I just had to come up with music that set the emotion of it well. So we wrote that song really fast. We did change the ending in Atlanta. It used to end kind of quietly and kind of introspectively. And then Casey, during a rehearsal, during previews one day said, kind of feel like I want to hear her really belt out the end. So during that rehearsal, I took Caitlin to the piano and we just kind of figured out what it should be. And it went into the show the next night. And we were all just blown away by how it didn't only just change that song, but it changed the entire act. It all of a sudden gave this big, you stepped on the gas pedal, for the remainder of Act One. And it was just an incredible lesson how, you change one thing here and it affects other things elsewhere. So it was, I really love the process of writing that song.
For me, it was really Love Thy Neighbor, because it's something that drives me insane when people say, oh, homosexuality is a sin, it's in the Bible. And you can't cherry pick the Bible and just say, well, this is, there are so many things in the Bible that people just completely ignore, but they, have their own agendas. So for me, it was so good and freeing to get that into a song and get that message out there, because it's something that just on a daily basis, when I hear these people filled with hate saying these things, it's like, come on, let's be real.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the show is ultimately about, love and acceptance. Again, I think it has the biggest heart on Broadway. What ways do you, I'm sure there's obvious ways, but what ways do you think you both connect with the story and the characters?
Well, for me, I obviously am much older than the characters in the high school, but, for me, there would be no way you would ever bring a same-sex date to your prom. It would have been impossible. And I remember when I went to NYU, they had a formal dance, and I finally decided to go with my boyfriend. And it was such a strange time, because we brought fake girlfriends because we weren't sure if we were going to be brave enough to do it. But then we ended up dancing together, and some people were horrified and some people were giving us thumbs up. And so, for me, it all of that is sort of entwined in the story. And, it's something that also emotionally, we have these kids coming up to our actors and to us just saying, this show means so much to me. I'm in the closet. My mom's over there. I'm coming out to her tonight because of this show. You've made it easier. It's just, the stage door experience has been just so emotional and so moving.
Yeah. The representation has definitely meant a lot to these kids that we keep meeting all the time and getting emails and messages from. And it's been really moving. My experience, I grew up in New Jersey, in a blue state, but my little gang of friends, there were 4 of us, and 2 were straight, 2 were gay. And my gay friends, they had, they had such a hard time coming out that they never did in high school. But then when they went to college, and they were both a year older than me, so when I was still in high school and they were in college, one of them in particular pulled me aside and told me that he was gay. And I knew, but he never really talked about it. But he had such, he was so worried that I was going to think differently about him, or that that our friendship was going to be affected by it. And he had such pain in his eyes. I'll just never forget that. I took that with me while I was writing that show, just remembering how hard it was for him to come out. And there are kids all over the country that it's still happening to. In some places it's better, and other places it's still really difficult. So I think it's an important story to keep telling.
Absolutely. Matthew, you brought up changes before to the material, and I'm curious because this show has been in the works for years and years.
Yeah.
And when you first started it, there was certainly a different landscape of gay rights, and a lot has changed since then. I'm curious what kinds of changes have occurred since those early readings in the Atlanta production.
Well, there was such optimism when we were first writing the show. We started working on it about 8 years ago, and when we were developing it, all these wonderful things were happening for the LGBTQ community. And some people were saying, is this story relevant anymore? Is it? And we weren't sure, but we just really believed in it, in what we were doing. So we kept going. And then, we had an election, and things have changed drastically. And we actually had to really rewrite the end of the show, because Alyssa at the end of the show used to say, the world's a better place now. And, in the last 2 years, things have really taken a turn for the worse. And so I know that dialogue definitely changed. And I just think the weight of the show has just become more, it's just become more important. It's just become more visceral because of what's going on in the country right now.
I also, before I let you go, I think this musical has meant a lot to, obviously, you have the stage door experiences that you talked about. It's meant a lot to a great deal of people, and does so with a lot of humor as well. What do you hope people take away as they leave the theater for the night?
Well, I think that, one thing that happened in Atlanta was, this woman came up to us and was like, I used to be Mrs. Green. I used to be that homophobic mother. And she just had such shame and such, and she introduced her daughter, who now has a wife, and they have children. But I hope people take away the fact that people can change. And even though it's a, funny, frothy musical comedy, it does have a message, and it does change hearts and minds.
Yeah, when we were in Atlanta, we had a talk back, and this older white gentleman raised his hand and basically said to us, if I knew what this show is about, I probably wouldn't have come, but I'm so glad I did, and I'm so glad those girls got together in the end. And we really felt, and he really said, he's like, you guys have actually made me think. And I mean, what better, nothing better than that with a piece of theater, to actually have somebody change their mind.
Yeah, the actual power of theater.
Yeah.
Well, I will let you guys go. Thank you so much for sitting down with me, and congrats on your Tony nominations.
Thank you so much.
Can't wait to see the next collaboration, next musical you pump out.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.